Are we on live now? Oh.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our live stream. If this is your first time here, welcome. If it's not, welcome back. We have the pleasure of having the world-renowned saxophonist, a hero of mine, and I've known him for quite some time, back to the days of Red Kelly in when I was in high school. This is the late 90s. This is the wonderful Pete Chrsitlieb, and we're so happy that you can be here to join us today, Pete. Thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
So
I remember Red Kelly.
Yeah.
That's
a whole nother segment, that project that I'm also working on. But there are many questions that I want to ask, and these hour things go by so quickly, and we'll probably have to do more than one with your permission. But so what I wanted to start with was, and I put a brief bio at the beginning of this post. It talks about, your childhood and all that kind of stuff and information about getting started. But growing up with your father as a professional bassoonist, he worked for the Walt Disney Studio Orchestra?
No, he worked 20th Century Fox. He was primarily at Fox because he got kind of recruited by the Fox Orchestra. His beginnings were at, when he was in his early 20s, his first big break was at MGM, and which meant that at that time frame they were doing he did Gone with the Wind and Wizard of Oz and all these famous pictures, and he was right in the thick of things. And I even have a video I took I saved it of him, seeing him when he was, I think it was before I was born. 34. I was born in 45. At 35 or 39, 38, excuse me, doing all these pictures, and they showed the studio orchestra, and there he was with black hair, and he looked different. He was a youngster, and but he was very dedicated, and he was one of the best bassoonists ever, and he wrote books on reed making, and he had a very unique sound, and I don't know why I didn't become a bassoonist, because it was there, but actually I started on violin, and so did Stan Getz and Lonnie Morgan and about 900 other people I know. They all started on violin.
I never knew that. I knew that in your bio, and I've heard you tell this story before, but I didn't know that so many other people started on violin prior to that. Usually hear like piano or something like that. But
I wish I had played piano. I have a piano, and I don't play it. It's I'm just having it rebuilt so other people can play it. But getting back to this thing about playing the saxophone, there was music in our house all the time, and Dad was a big organizer, and he put together concerts, and he was really a chamber music champion, and he started this series, and it was like a gig for classical guys to go play, and I talk about this with with my students. If you want to be heard, you want to get some work in time. You have to be heard. You make yourself available. You go play in a bunch of bands. That's how people find out how you play, because they come to these events, and if you're playing with this band, then somebody says, well, I want him to play in my band. Next thing you know, you're playing with everybody's band. And that's great. That's the best publicity you can get. And this is what happened with all these classical musicians and this gig that my father was put together. And eventually they got some very heavy people in there. Stravinsky, for one. And when he moved to California, Dad became his right-hand man for putting a good band together to do his music, and so that was going on in the house all the time. So that's how I became a violin player. I was sitting next to the violin player. I was 6 years old, I think, and I was sitting there, and they're doing a Histoire des Soldats, which was Story of the Soldier, and there's a violin, and there's, bassoon, flute, jazz drums. They had a jazz kit. Stravinsky was enamored with 20s jazz, so he immediately, I like it, it's inventive, So I did pretty good with that for a while, but they made a horrible mistake. They went away and left jazz records laying around in the house, and I put one of them on, and it was Jerry Mulligan and Chet Baker, and it was one of the first records that they made together. It was MRC Records, and I think it was a 10-inch LP, or I don't think it was 78. No, it wasn't. And it was green. They came in different colors in those days. It was weird. But on that record was Chet Baker and Jerry Mulligan and Carson Smith, who I met, and Larry Bunker. Larry Bunker became a first call percussionist in the studios in L.A. And Carson Smith, I think he moved to Nevada eventually. He spent a lot of time in Las Vegas, and I got to play with him. I got to play with Larry Bunker a lot. I got to play with. It's weird how this happens. You meet these people, next thing you know, or you see these people, and I was just kind of in the right place at the right time, and I met all these people, or I got to play with all these people, and Chet was very interesting. Chet Baker, being a heroin addict, I made a very, very common error. I said, if you go out of town with a junkie, make sure you get your money first, because he stranded myself and two other guys in Pueblo, Colorado. He took the money and split, and we had, it was great. I had to call home, my career's not working out, Mom. I need some money to get home, So I made a song up called "You're Nobody Until Chet Baker Owes You." Oh, no. Yeah, and I ran into him from time to time. He was a great player, lyrical. I can tell you this, of all the animosity I have for that person, he was a big influence on me. Chet was a natural, and he was one of the first things that went into my head that gave me a real, direction. I had all these, people say, who do you listen to? I listen to a lot of people, but you take it all in, and then you're sifting through it, and Chet was very important, because I heard him play several times. He'd play a whole chorus in one breath. I mean, 12 bars, a blues or something like that. He'd play a whole chorus in one breath, because the ideas were coming, and he didn't stop. He was prolific.
I could say the same thing about you. I've heard you live and on recordings most of my life, and it's very much the same.
Influences, but that I'm trying to say that's where I came from, and then the first records were Jerry Mulligan, Chet Baker, and I did meet Jerry when I was a youngster, but he was a very busy man, and I didn't really get any personal with him, but it was very personal with Chet, and we move on, and so the next things in order, you know, were the other people that I had listened to. You know, what are your influences? Well, I like everybody. You know, you have your Stan Getz era, you have your Zoot Sims era, you know, and then I was introduced in my high school days by a guy across the street who was he had jazz going in his all the time, and I was going to high school, and I would fall into his place, and he had all this jazz going, and he introduced me to people that you know, it was jazz in retrospect. It was Charlie Parker. Wow, listen to this. Well, Charlie Parker became he was here before all these guys. He was you know, kind of the father of the whole thing, bebop. And then I remember we had little groups, and we played in high school. You know, did you have a band in high school? Did you get some guys together?
Well, yeah, we had jazz band, which it was okay. I mean, knowing what I know now, I mean, it was certainly not like Garfield or Roosevelt in Seattle, but it was something to play. And then we were putting together pickup groups, and we were watching you guys play at Red Kelly's, and then we'd find little coffee shops and put groups together and play. You know, Cliff Cologne and I did quite a bit of that together.
You're still doing that.
Yes, we are, and the pay has gotten worse.
Yeah. Well, I listened to all these people, and like I told my students, you listen to a lot of people and you emulate them, and sooner or later, you will form your opinions and your desires and likes, and become the sound of your body, your mind, your being. And as I tell, you know, I could play your saxophone, you could play my mouthpiece, I could play yours, a completely different setup, but no matter what, you're going to still sound like you. As weird as that is, because there's sure a lot of difference in setups, you know. So, Stan was an interesting character.
Stan Getz?
Wonderful, beautiful. I don't think I ever anybody play as beautiful on ballads and things, and things. You know, when that bossa nova thing came around, it was really beautiful. But Stan he was such a character. It was Zoot Sims used to call him a nice bunch of guys, because you never knew which Stan you were going to meet. You know, and a lot of times he was kind of an angry character, and you didn't want to be around him, you know. On the other hand, Zoot was that was a big. I loved the energy and the happy thing. Zoot always exuded this thing, you know, bright, and I got to meet him, and I got to play with him a couple times.
Was this? I know you did Woody Herman's band later on. Was this at that time, or?
No. He came to L.A. This was. I think that's kind of after Woody Herman's time. The road business. Everybody does. I mean, in my era, everybody did it. I mean, the first thing you do, I got a call, and there was a guy that I grew up with who was on a band, who we played together when we were kids, and he was on the band, and he said, I was in junior college, my first year of junior college, you know, and all I wanted to do was play. I got there, and they load you up with all these classes, you know, and things that have nothing to do with music. And it's really, I tell people now, you know, you should take advantage of that stuff. It'll all come in handy someday when you're old and need that information to get through things. And spelling is good. You should learn how to spell, you know. I didn't care about that. I don't care. I can play horn. That's what I want. So I keep a dictionary around, but every time I have to write something out or something, I have to look at certain silly words that don't seem like phonetically they're going to come around, So you have to look at the truth. So it takes a little while to put it together, but I try to stick with the program, Anyway, Zoot and then Al. Then there was Al Cohen. Al Cohen was Mr. Melody. He had kind of a rough, airy, kind of rough sound that wasn't sweet and melodic like Zoot and Stan. They had some edge to their sound, and Al was different. But what he was playing was gorgeous, and he wrote all these tunes that are we recorded a few of them, and then he wrote big band music. He was a great prolific writer. When I ran into him at a jazz party years later, I tried to talk to him about it, and he says, "Well, I did that." He says, "Now all I want to do is play," and I can understand that.
Was he doing that, do you think, for financial reasons, for like publishing, or just for enjoyment?
Why do people write? Because they got things going on in their head. I wished I tell kids in school, I said, here's the thing. Well, you want to learn how to write music, because a lot of my friends, when the business is slow, a lot of my friends go out and take jobs orchestrating for big-time composers, and they make more money in one day than they could make in 6 months playing the saxophone. And that's the truth. I mean, you get paid by the bar. When you're in a bar, you get paid by the door.
If that. Well, it almost seems like, and I know you can speak to this because you've been doing this for a very long time, but it seems like not only for musicians that are playing in clubs have wages gone down considerably in the last 10, 20, 30 years, but the same thing I would say for composers and orchestrators, their wages have gone down as well.
I don't know that's, I can imagine it's true, but there's still a system. Like I wrote a tune on the Tonight Show. I was in the Tonight Show band, and I wrote a tune for actually I wrote it for a record I was doing with a guy, and I named it after my dog who got run over, and it took about 3 weeks to find him, and he was all busted up in a pound in a cage, and I found him, and I took him, and I had surgery, and his one leg was all screwed up, and he hopped around on 3 legs and everything, and I wrote a tune, and his name was Blackie, and I called it tune 3-Ton Blues. And I wrote it out for the Tonight Show, and every time they played it, I got a check in the mail on the air, and if they did a feature on it, because they featured the band, and they said, "Well, your tune's going to be next. Your tune's going to be next." 20 years, it never happened. But those $100 shots, I bet I made $5,000 or $6,000 on one tune. And there were guys who were so good at this. John Bambridge, he wrote for our 11-piece band, and he wrote. Doc was always Doc Severinsen. He had Tommy Newsom, who was a wonderful arranger. He could write for symphony orchestra. He did things for Doc when he went out and played with symphony orchestras. Tommy wrote that stuff, but he wrote some of the great music for the Tonight Show band, and because it was strange, it was it wasn't strange then, but it is now, because you never see that again. A real jazz band on television just hooting and hollering and playing jazz and really getting it on television. And when that ended, you never saw that again.
Well, it seems kind of like a lot of movies and shows and you don't, or talk shows, they used to have studio orchestras, and now it might be a very small group, or maybe someone does all the music on a keyboard and that's it. You don't have, for some reason. I mean, I prefer, when I listen to movies, like Disney movies, for example, the older orchestrations, where like the modern stuff is not really my personal cup of tea, or I don't have affinity for that. But
well, it seems to flow with the you know, the flavor of the day. You know, it's all pop music, rock music. You know, this is what people want to hear. So you hear this, you won't hear, unless it's a period picture with period music. You know, it's going to be loud and noisy and boom boom and crash bang and and I had my share of it. I did. During the Tonight Show, I got a call from these two guys, and I went in and made some. I'd never heard of them before. They called themselves Steely Dan. And I went, and I just another gig, after the Tonight Show. Wow, we're running. We go on at 5:30, and we're done at 6:30. So. Can you be here at, So I went there and they played this tune for me, and then I went from the booth in the studio, I sat down and made one take on it. And they said, geez, that's great. Don't do another thing, It was called Deacon Blues. And they handed me $300. Then they sold 40 million copies.
Then there's Spotify.
Yeah. Well, geez, if I'd have said I want more money, they'd have got somebody cheaper. So at least I got that, How I made that up was pretty. People would call me because it was, everywhere you went, you heard this thing. It played and played and played and played and played. In the airport bathroom, anywhere in the world, there you could hear yourself playing, and elevators and everything. So people call me. They said, we heard your solo on this record. We want to do it for you. Can you do one for us? And I said, sure. Well, how much did they pay? I said, $1,500. And that lasted a while. And then, sooner or later, it was good while it lasted, but
Well, I always enjoy. I've learned so much listening to you play live and from your solos. I remember bringing you a solo once and that I transcribed. It was from an album you did with Ricky Woodard and Ernie Watts Tenor Trio, and it was your solo on Strollin'. And I brought it to you. This is up at at the time the Bud Shank Jazz Festival, which is now Centrum. Yeah. And you said, "Is that what that looks like on paper?"
It's weird, but sometimes you'd see all these notes and you say, "I can't believe I did. I can't read it." Well, I could play it, but I can't read it.
What I was going to say is I've learned a lot from playing, but also just the stories that I've heard you tell in workshops or clinics or in passing, And I've always had other questions that I wanted to ask, and one in particular was I know you studied with Bob Cooper. You saw him play at the Lighthouse, and how did you get in touch with him to start studying with him?
Well, because one of the few places that young aspiring jazz people and underage could get into and hear live jazz. Everything up on the Sunset Strip and all these fancy clubs, it was 21 only, and most of us were in high school. So it's not like you could sneak under the tent and see the circus. They got a bouncer there looking to get you out of there.
That was the same at Red Kelly's. Like when you guys played there, minors could be in the back room, but you couldn't go around the front. So myself and everyone, we could always look from afar and listen, but we couldn't go in and be a part of it.
Well, at least you got in. I mean, that's that's great. I miss that place. It had an ambience all of its own. A wealth of pictures from jazz era of just about everybody you can imagine on the wall. I don't know what happened to all of them.
So they're now, the majority of them, from what I understand, they're down at the Tacoma Main Library. They kept them in a historical kind of collection so you can go see them still. So they're still around.
I remember that he had lunch there, and the mayor, a gal was a mayor at one time, and she had lunch there every day, hung out with that crowd, and they...
Well, so getting back to Bob Cooper. So how did you get in contact with him?
Well, he studied reed making with my father, because Bob was one of the first. Bud Shank was one of the first. These guys were Lighthouse All-Stars in the 50s.
He was married. Bob Cooper was married to June Christie.
June Christie, because he was on Kenton's band, and June was a big singer on the band, and so I went down to see him, and I said, I didn't even know that he was taking reed making lessons from my father, because but he was, like I said, he there wasn't oboe in jazz, and there wasn't flute in jazz until these two guys came along. I mean, you didn't hear flute. Now all of a sudden there's flute in jazz, and now there's oboe in jazz. So Bob was playing, and I really dug the way he played, and who wouldn't? I think my personal feelings towards Bob's contribution to the world of jazz was that if Lester Young had lived as long as Bob Cooper had lived, he would eventually have got some fire under his ass and played like Bob Cooper, because Bob took it from there. He had that Lester finesse, lyrical thing, but there's a little more fire in it, and a little more edge, and so I took to it right away, and I said, I want to come over. I want to take lessons. And he says, well, that's not too... he said, that's great. I want to live a block away from you. And I said, what? Yeah. He lived a block from our house down the road a little bit. And then, so I went over there, and there was June Christie, and I, got our horns out, and we started playing. And he was... Here again, it's the way I like to teach, it's from experience and everything, and I'm telling him all this stuff, and he says, why don't you just play? You can tell me that stuff later. Let's play, And eventually we ended up making a record together.
I have it, as do many others. It's a great one.
It turned out very, very well. I had some good musicians.
You guys do Coco on there, don't you? Yeah, right. No. Yeah, it is. Well, we put our record together when we decided to do a record. I called him, and I said, I want you to do an album. This guy was making records all over the place. He was quite... he put bands together, and they had concerts up at the beach in Oregon. Jim Brown was his name, and they had the Outer Crest Jazz Weekend, and it went on every year, and they brought people in from all over to do it, and I got to do it, and Shelly Manne was there, and everybody you can imagine in jazz had showed up there and they put bands together, and I got to play with them. Well, he said, well, let's do a record with you and Coop. I said, fine. So I was over there, and we put that. I had a couple of my tunes. He had his. We had a pretty good. I think there was like 8 or 10 tunes on that thing, and we did it live. And Chuck Berghofer was the bass player on that one, and Mike Walford
who was wonderful bass. Oh God, one of the best piano players. He played with Shelly Manne for a long time, and Donald Bailey, who was from my experience with Donald Bailey was at the Lighthouse in the early days when I would go to see the guys play, and eventually I got to play with him, and then he was on my album, and a very unique drummer, did everything totally different than anybody I've ever seen, but his time was very, very, it put you in gear, really, you couldn't ignore it. It was there, it moved you, and then Coop was one of the first recipients of a artificial valve in his heart. It just came at him, and that's how I got involved with Bill Holman, because Coop was on Bill Holman's band, and he had he had that big valve for many years, but one day it just gave up, and Bob ended up on the way to the Holman rehearsal, had passed out in his car on Vine Street, down the street from the Union, in a bus station, and he was gone. It was a shock to God Almighty, So then I got a call from home and say, listen, can you take over for Coop? I said, fine. So I did that for, that was 20 years or something. I was on that band, And, he wrote a lot of charts for our band and everything.
I think one of my favorite, there's an album you guys did, I think it's called A View from the Side, and there's a feature for you on But Not For Me. It's one of my favorite recordings that you've done. But But Beautiful, sorry.
Yeah. And he did it in 3. Yeah. Which is...
and then you did it in 2 on the recording. It's in 3, and then it goes into like a 2.
It goes into 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, he made you dance. You did a lot of dancing.
Well, going back to some of the stories that you've told, there's a couple things that I remember after a particular show at Red Kelly's, or you'd always be talking with folks, and I'd always wait till the end of the night to ask you questions. And a couple of things that I picked up. One is you said, I was asking you, what is it that I should be practicing? And you said learn melodies very, very well in all 12 keys. I don't know if you probably don't recall this, but it was good advice, I thought.
A lot of work to me.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd go for that.
That's what you said.
Like Richie Cole recorded Cherokee, and he did it in 12 keys or something like that. By the end of the second key, I'd be real tired of it. I had already tossed that record out the window.
Well, there was another story. I remember you were. This had to be like, I think this was at Centrum, but you were mentioning growing up in your household that when there were, if there was an argument between people around the family, like you would just slam the door and people would just practice scales. Is that true?
No, I'd go play tunes. I don't know. It was this taking it all in, like the tape is running up here, like. I listen to somebody, and I listen to the way he plays, and I take these things and I emulate them, and it helped a lot having listened to all these players, because it gives you a direction, I hear kids playing the same licks over and over and over again. If you go to the NAMM show and you have people trying out instruments, oh boy, you hear the same lick for 12 hours, It's to drive you nuts, Don't you know something else? How about listening to somebody else, And it wasn't just saxophone players. I mean, when you listen to, when I was exposed to Bill Evans, there's something different, really different, or who's your favorite trumpet player? I remember when we were kids, I wasn't. I was very opinionated, but because I had my my group of records and my group of people I was with, and we were exposed to this and exposed to that all together. And so that's where those influences were coming from. And then we had a jam session or something and at somebody's house, and we were carpooling, and we were on our way back, and the radio on a jazz station, and it was Miles Davis, Milestones, with Coltrane and Cannonball Adderley, and it was the first time we'd ever heard that, and it was, man, I'm telling you, everybody had an anxiety attack. It was like, gee, God, can you believe that? Listen to that, you know. I mean, first of all, when Cannonball played, you know, it was like, man, this is a monster. Wow, talk about energy. And that ended up becoming a big influence on me. I mean, his time and the energy, his approach was totally, it was infectious. I mean, you couldn't get, you know, it was in you. You got it now, boy, you know. That's the way to play. You know, boy, when you go through here, you give it the gas and you go around that corner as fast as you can go, and then, you know, and it feels good. I mean, he felt good when he played, you know. And I got to meet him. And then we're listening to that, and all of a sudden, Coltrane, God, he comes out of nowhere with this thing. It's totally different. You've never heard anything like that, and all our heads are swiveling around. Like, what the heck happened here, you know? And so, you realize that was one of the first times that within 6 months, everybody was in a corner playing Coltrane licks, right?
Well, when you were listening to all these things, even going back to like the early influences, Chet Baker, Jerry Mulligan,
Yeah.
Stan Getz, were you ever were you transcribing those solos, just learning to play them by ear, or just listening and for enjoyment, or how did you deal with the information?
I was just taking it and running with it, you know. And there's nothing like having the experience, you know, putting it into practical use, you know, playing and getting tired of playing this and moving on to something else. And, you know, sooner or later when you stop playing too many choruses and get let out into the street by every rhythm section in town for playing 12 choruses when you could have played it in 2, and you'd still be in there playing with them. They get bugged, and you're out of there. You know.
Well, I was going to ask you, we talked about this a little bit before the broadcast started, but one of my professors in college was Hadley Callman, and you said you knew Hadley when you guys were kids. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I was on the road with Woody Herman's band. I mean, I got when I quit Cy Zentner's band, I had been on the band a year, and we were playing the same Elks clubs, and we were doing the same gigs all the time, and it was a dance band, and I wanted to play, you know, Woody Herman's band, but they were all playing hot jazz, and it was like the revival of the Herd, you know. In '65, that record came out, and there was Sal Nistico just roaring, you know. And so I got a call. Somebody, Buddy Childers was I mean, we were doing a gig with Della Reese in Vegas, because it was just one of those things that you did. You went out. It was a jazz gig, and so Buddy went over on the break to Woody's gig at the Tropicana, and I had played there several times with Cy's band. And he says, Joe Farrell's leaving the band. And Joe Farrell, you know, great saxophone player, you know, pretty good flute player too. He left the band, and they called me. And I said, "Well, great. I'll be in L.A." And then they said, "Well, the first gig's at this club in L.A. and at a place called the Shea. That Buddy Rich had opened the doors at that place with his band, and we were the next band in there." And so I go there, and I had all the records, so I knew the stuff, and I and here I am playing Sal's Chair, which is like, man, and I was ready for it. Oh God, I was like, yeah, let me at it, And the first night, I'm playing, and who's sitting in front of me? But Louis Bellson and Dizzy Gillespie.
No pressure.
Yeah, well, yeah. Luckily, I was so attuned to making my mark on this, making my point, that I think I can do this, In fact, I know I can do it. Count it off, And later on, I ended up with Louis Bellson, and he told me the story of that night, because sitting next to me was a guy named Al Gibbons. He was a black tenor player, and Al, he sounded like Stan Getz. He had that Stan Getz thing. He didn't sound like Coleman Hawkins or any of the 900 greatest black tenor players who were all great influences on me, and I'm playing like all the black tenor players that I ever heard, Louis Bellson said later on, he says, when you were up there playing, he says, Diz leaned over to me and he says, "How come the white guy sounds like the black guy and the black guy sounds like the white guy?" Yeah, and working for Louis was I ended up off and on for 30 years working for that man.
So is that where you met Hadley, or?
But I got a call. I was off, and I got a call. I got off that band, and because it didn't work out. At the end of the gig, they got Sal Nistico back and laid me off. They went to Europe, So I had a chance to do another gig. I got a call from Bobby Bryant to go down and it was a gig in downtown L.A. Organ, 2 tenors, trumpet, and drums. So it was always a battle between the 2 tenors, It was a sword fight and a pirate picture, And the crowd would go crazy, They'd be dancing on the tables. If you were really getting it, they'd be yelling and screaming at you, And so it was Hadley. Actually, it was Herman Riley first. And Herman Riley went out with Louis Bellson's band, so Hadley came in. And then I played with Hadley for 6 months, And he had a very, very strong Coltrane image going, And I was just, I was just turning. I didn't quite turn 21 yet, and I was in that place. And Hadley had been, he had been with, I think Hadley went out with Horace Silver at one time. I think he did that. He did a lot of things.
I know he was with Santana, and he also was in Freddie Hubbard's band. There's videos you can see of him. I don't know prior to that. I didn't know about Horace.
Well, we went at it. We went at it. That's what we were there for. Dueling tenors, ladies and gentlemen. I tell you that so much for politics, but Oliver Nelson came off the road and knew this was the hot place to be, and he brought his horn in and got up on the bandstand. And we chewed a hole in... This guy, he never, it was like he was attacked by wild animals, And he was, and when he moved to town, and he got all these television shows. I never got a call. I wonder why, you know. I bid him, you know. They said, and Hadley looked at me and he says, "You know who that was?" He says, "How could you do that?" I said, "Well, I mean, it's like a chained up dog, you know. I'm a junkyard dog, you know." And so it never, you know, I never had ever worked for that guy, you know. But anyway, Hadley never told me. You know, there's dark in everybody's past somewhere. Not as serious as being a heroin addict. But he had just, when he started working that gig and I met him, he had just ended up quitting heroin. And obviously, I know for sure he never went back. Some guys, they never quite get away from it, you know, but he quit it. And when we were working together here, I come up and play with him and stuff, and we did concerts down in Oregon. We did that concert in the park. We played together, and then we did well, the reason we did an album up here is simply, I heard that he was fighting liver cancer. And that was the byproduct of being a junkie. A lot of junkies, a lot of people died that way.
I remember my very first lesson when I got to Cornish. It was supposed to be an hour lesson, and I went into his office, and he rolled up his sleeves and showed me his track marks, and he said, "You see this?
Yeah.
Don't ever do this. All right, I'll see you next week." That was the whole lesson.
That'll be $50.
Yeah, exactly. No, he was a very wonderful teacher, and I think, you know, he impressed that opinion on all the students that he was in contact with.
He lived through it. It was the great thing that he could pass on to other people, you know. And I tried a lot of stuff, but by inadvertent circumstances, I got a dose of heroin. And all I can tell you is it was kind of like a door opening an elevator shaft, and you step into it and you're heading down like this, and you go, "I'm falling, I can't do anything about it. Geez, my heart's starting to stop. I start sweating." You say, "Oh man, I'm going to die," you know. And I know that other people have the same experience with it. What the hell would make them want to do that again? I don't, you know, one time, that was it. Boy, and I didn't even know it. I just, you know, it was a guy who I thought was my friend. And we were doing a record with Louis Bellson, and Don Menza was sitting next to me, and it was we were doing Time Check. And I was like, man, I'm really zoned out, man. I was like fighting to, you know, play, and it was like, I am going to play fast, and I'm going to play great, you know. Where's my horn? Where's my face? I was in deep trouble. And I never forgive those guys for doing that, you know. It was a rude, horrible trick to play on anybody, you know. But
well, we're getting to that time here where we need to start wrapping up. And I only got through like a fourth of my questions, and we'll certainly have to do this again. One more question. Well, what we do now is we open things up for the audience to ask questions. So I want to see, do we have any questions from the audience at this time? Does anyone want to know anything from the great Pete Chrsitlieb while we're here on camera? Now that I prompted that, I'm sure something's going to probably start rolling in. Any questions? Not yet. Okay, while we're waiting for that, can you talk to us about your association with Bill Ramsey? Because that's how I met you, was through Bill and his big band.
Well, he's the reason I'm here.
Define that, because people don't know. People don't know that you grew up and lived in L.A., but now you moved to the Northwest. So
how many years? 70? Was it 65? 68? How many years were we lived here? 3.5.
You're in Spanaway now, correct?
Spanaway. Yeah.
Spanaway.
So all my life I lived in L.A. But I was coming up here. First of all, I met Bill in L.A. He came into Dante's, that famous jazz club, when he was in town traveling around with a Basie band. He came in to see me, and we got to meeting each other. And then eventually, when I got a call from Bud Shank to come up and do my first camp, Bill was on staff there, and we knew each other. And has how the sessions at camp go for, you do a combo class, then you do a workshop, and then you do another combo class every day until the end of the week. Then you do concerts, and then on Saturday you do concerts, and Sunday you go home. Well, all the time, Ramsey and I when we leave Central, immediately we go to Red Kelly's and hang out at Red Kelly's and play at Red Kelly's that night, Sunday night. So a lot of times we just, and every time I come up to do something around here, because then it was Ramsey Kleeb band, so they were doing concerts and they'd have me come up all the time, and I was a big crab aficionado here. He introduced me to Harbor Lights.
It's right down the street.
And so I would come up here, and I wouldn't even bring my horn. I just came here to have crab.
I remember vividly one time, I was in high school, getting things together, and we were playing at Red Kelly's, and there was no one in there, and I was playing a tune, and I had my eyes closed playing, we were practicing basically, and I opened my eyes, and sitting at the bar, it was Red and Bill and you, and I was terrified for the rest of the gig. And you guys were very nice, but no, it was a lot of fun.
I
but
didn't mean to sneak up on you.
I'm
sure there was no malice. Probably because we were so happy. Red was a boy. Could he put it away? I'll tell you. You're gonna be a big drinker and own your own bar. You're in big trouble. He and his wife used to fall down the stairs in the back there.
Good thing he lived at the bar, so he lived downstairs. So yeah. Do we have any questions that have come in? No. Okay. Well, we've got another 5 minutes here. So let's see. So you're here in Spanaway now, and I would love to do this again if you have more time. I mean, we're all kind of sheltered in place anyways right now, but hopefully we can do this again. Do you have any? For viewers at home that are not familiar with Pete Chrsitlieb's music, I would really like you to Google him and check out albums that he's done. There's some that you can still buy online. A lot of great ones. There's a couple great ones with you and Warren Marsh, Conversations Volume 1 and Volume 2. Wow. There's I think you can still get the Kelly's Heroes album. That's around.
I have some.
Yeah, so what I would say is, if you want to buy albums from Pete, don't do it online. Just get in touch with him. You can find him online and buy directly from him, because the artists get paid a lot more money that way than through a third party. So please contact the artists directly. Any of the artists that we've had on this series, if you want to buy the material, contact them and see how you can purchase the music directly from them. Not Spotify, not Bandcamp, not these other things, because the artists need your support. So are there any projects in the near future coming up that you want to mention?
Yeah, two. We have two projects. Linda and I are going to make a record, or a CD rather, I thought it was a good idea to do something with a gentleman who has been a club owner and a pianist I've played with many times, and he's very well known around here. He's a great guy. His name is Danny Koki, and he had Boxley's for years, and I used to come up here, and Linda and I come up here and play at Boxley's, but he he sold it, and now he started another club right down the street, and it's Bill Boxley's. Yeah. Well, because of the situation we're all dealing with here, the pandemic thing where people can't, gather, it's starting to open up, but we've been going over and doing videos with Danny's trio, and I thought it'd be a good idea since we made a couple of records over the last 10 years or something. And
you did a quartet album with him already, yeah.
But I think, we'd like to do Tall and Small, Pete Chrsitlieb and Linda Small with the Danny Koke trio, and have another album on the shelf over there, and another album to, if nothing else, drum up some business, so we have a place to play and get more people in there, and we're trying to build it up. It seems that I know you noticed that we've taken quite a hit. I mean, I used to see you were playing in 3 or 4 different clubs a week, and I can imagine that's kind of disappeared, hasn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, right now, currently with legislation in the state of Washington, there is no live music. Everything's been, you can't. You're not supposed to perform in clubs or bars. I mean, there's live streams and things like this, or like what Danny's doing, or Earshot Jazz has done some things as well, or different organizations. But as far as like performing in front of a live audience right now, we're not allowed to do that until, if I understand correctly, I think phase 4, and who knows when that's going to be, because they keep extending the phases. So it's interesting times for everybody right now. It's like you can't teach in person, you can't perform in person. Who knows what band programs are going to look like in middle schools and high schools and colleges. A lot of those, from what I understand, are going to be online, which means how is that going to work? So if you're a musician, like you're a full-time musician, I'm a full-time musician, and our livelihoods depend on those things, it's severely handicapped right now, which is very frustrating.
I had from being in LA working for 30 years, and the Tonight Show and all the television work I did and the records and things like that, I had a pension. And that's basically what I've been living on for years. And now they've decided that they're going to, the Federation of wonderful people in New York have decided they're going to take half of my money.
This is the AFM, the union?
Going to cut my pension in half.
This is a whole nother interview.
Oh boy. So I will get by. I could sell a couple of tenors, and that'll get me through the winter. I should have bought those Selmers when they were $500. And you could sell them for $10,000 now. But I tell you, I've got a horn that I like really. It was custom built for me, and it's a Yamaha that's exact copy of a Mark VI. Every dimension of it is the same. Not a big bore, everything, the keys, the thing, and it plays like a Mark VI.
How's the weight? I've noticed a lot of newer saxophones seem like they're heavier than the older saxophones.
See, when I get this thing out, we played. This was 1949, and it's featherweight. It's really light, and it's balanced. That's my favorite horn. My balanced. Anyway.
So, yeah, we need to wrap up. So, for those of you joining us, thank you for watching. Did any questions come in? Okay, well,
you owe me money.
So thank you all for joining us. We're going to start the live stream performance here in about an hour at 6 o'clock, so we're going to get things sounding good. I'll be sure to turn the mics on prior to recording this time, so for those of you that were here last week, don't worry about that. And stick around, so we'll be back in an hour, and thanks for joining us, and see you again soon. Thank you.